Good evening and greetings from Australia, or should I say, g'day. I must begin my presentation by apologising to Maestro Rocco for not proofreading the text of my presentation 20 times before I sent it to him. And to you watching, my apologies if you're also referencing the conference notes. This presentation should address my spelling errors and my grammatical mistakes with a bit of humour and good nature. The basic content of the paper is all correct, just the manner in which it is dressed is somewhat problematic at times. Again, my apologies. And might I ask that those who translate this or add subtitles to this do so in the same colloquial and conversational manner in which I present it. No academic language, please. I wouldn't know what to do to connect myself with academic language and the way I actually talk. Any considerations of repertoire for the band produced and utilised in Australia over the last century and a half must not focus solely on the composer, but also on the broad community of interest that has commissioned, performed, championed, and disseminated such works over the course of time. For me to speak to you of such projects and productions in the Australian context, it is reasonable and appropriate to do so in a manner that would be utilised by we Australians, thus that colloquial and conversational manner that I spoke about before. And if I was there in person, it's definitely the way I would be talking and presenting at the conference. Similarly, one can't consider those works alone, the works of all the composers that have either stood the test of time or still hold a place because of their status across the ages, for one must reflect on multiple layers of meaning and significance. For example, to say that Percy Grainger is the preeminent composer for bands in Australia is accepted fact. But what work of his stands out as the most compelling, engaging, or substantial would be to begin a debate that may have no end, especially if the conductors and musicians were thus engaged in discussion after a performance, and with the beer in hand that Grainger said was their greatest interest. Yet the music of others stand the test of time as well, and the status of those composers in the historical context of band development in this country is more or less significant across that stretch of time also. For example, the march Invercargill by Lithgow is still a march considered by many, not just aficionados, but by many as a fine exemplar of what band music is, even today. It has the hallmarks of quality that some contemporary march composers should investigate, let me say. Now, back to Grainger. When we glance back at him, we consider the status of Lincolnshire poesy and the power of Rome and the Christian heart, but they need to be considered alongside works like the Hillsong, the Lads of Wamphray, Handel on the Strand, and multiple others. What are the works that are less mammoth, but which seize the heart and mind? The Immovable Doe, I can't get that note out of my head sometimes, Children's March, and Irish Tune from County Derry. What biases come though? What draws us to one thing or another of Grainger's works? Often, we can't explain why we fell in love with the Grainger piece that we loved first. I can't explain very well, but I'll give you a story, because I am a bit of a raconteur. For me, it was Australian upcountry tune that I fell in love with first, and I can't explain why. As a young trumpet player, doubling on cornet and fresh out of high school, I sat transfixed in the central band of the Royal Australian Air Force as we played that work many times in my tenure with the band. I could not understand what it was that was drawing me in. Even when we recorded Grainger's extant published works for band for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and that was a momentous and enormous project, I was still captivated, enchanted even, by Grainger's simple, elegant, yet uncomplicated tune. Now, there's no need to consider any of Grainger's works in detail here, for multiple books and articles have been produced on his music, and all of them better than anything that I could present. But suffice to say, his work is the benchmark of Australian band compositions, and many composers in many locales have tried to emulate him with varying levels of success. But one who's done well is the Australian composer David Stanhope. His band works don't just display Granger-esque influences, but some seem completely drenched in Percy. Consider Folk Songs for Band, Suite No. 1, and the Little Ripper March. As one audience member commented within my earshot at a Midwest performance of Suite No. 1, that's Granger on steroids. That's a pretty good review, isn't it? To investigate in more detail repertoire produced for concert band, one might read the book The Band Down Under, Australian Composers and Their Works for Band. It's an ebook by American Michael Birch-Pieces. An immediate warning is that this is a book about Australian band music written by an American, therefore coming with a specific cultural bias. When one considers that the foreword to the book was also written by an American, though he was resident for a short time in Australia, one can understand how a local conductor and composer might approach the end result of their endeavours with a degree of scepticism. Still, the book presents many composers and their works and should be considered. Now, given how band functions in Australia, one must understand the unique environment that goes to produce band music in this country. For example, well, to describe it, we have a British band heritage, both military bands and brass bands, and the community engagement of both types have been significant. From the local citizens band to the core bands of the Salvation Army, band music has been in the halls and on the streets of Australia for the full 150 years alluded to in the essay title, in this presentation's title. The influence of the American school band system via the repertoire published and the method books that are distributed and sold worldwide also has to be acknowledged. But my argument here is that the broad community of interest that has, once again that list, commissioned, performed, championed, and disseminated such works over the course of time is what propels repertoire development. It's not just the composer. I will seek to substantiate my assertion by way of example, and that example is the state of Queensland, the state I live in. I look back also, not across that 150 years, because though I'm ancient, I'm not that ancient. I look back 40 years to 1985 and move forward from there. It's a snapshot, but it gives an example of what I'm talking about. Yes, it's a biased snapshot. For in that 40-year period, I have been actively involved as a conductor and music lecturer, and also as a composer. But that first-hand immersed experience means that the evidence of the matters which I present here is valid, valuable, and viable. Valid, valuable, and viable. That eyewitness locus of that period allowed me to observe all that was needed to foster the production of new band music and to allow it then to fall into place. It was all present, some by happenstance, other components much more purposefully. And we'll work through those components now. Queensland, my state, did I mention that's where I live? Queensland has one of the most well-developed school-based instrumental music programs in the country, and it has become a generator of new music in those 40 years. From 3rd grade for strings and 4th grade for band, and through to 12th grade, students in the state-run Department of Education school system can learn to play an instrument for free. The program they learn in is an ensemble-based program, meaning that the end result of tuition, which is presented in small group fashion, is a performance ensemble of either concert band or string orchestra. There is an established curriculum for teaching and ensemble training, even though the program is extracurricular. That's fantastic, isn't it? Band is not a subject, it's an adjunct to normal school instruction, but it has an established curriculum which is measured through assessment. Private and church-based schools have also developed instrumental programs which are to a varying degree similar to that of the education department. They too have sought to engage with local repertoire, but the size and statewide nature of the departmental program has assured it has had the most significant impact on repertoire choice and repertoire development. Though not an active participant in producing new music, the structure and constant pursuit of professional development of conductors and teachers in the state system has, by default, been a catalyst for the production of new repertoire. My time with the department saw me engaged as a conductor teacher for 60% of my week, so for 3 days of my week, and a composer arranger for the whole statewide program for the remainder of that week. Such a thriving program produced a hunger for new music, and many ensembles featured Australian music on their programs, though not enough, I think, but that's my bias, hey. Not only has the school program produced a demand for new Australian band music, it has also produced a burgeoning community music program, with adult bands continuing to develop and grow across the state. Those ensembles have themselves become the commissioners of new music. So we find that, beginning in 4th grade and ending in adulthood, band development is producing new repertoire in Australia and in Queensland in particular. What has developed is quality new music at all levels, not just at the semi-professional and professional level. 2 ensembles, community ensembles, present that situation well, displaying consistent utilisation of Australian repertoire and often premiering of new work, sometimes multiple times in a season or on a single concert. The Queensland Wind Orchestra is probably the finest community wind band in the state. It presents seasons of concert performance and engages audiences at every level. It does not, as most bands do, it plays park concerts, but it does not feature most of its work in park concerts. It does the music in park concerts that park concert audiences want to hear. But in general, it presents its work by means of concert performance in a concert hall with ticketed seating. The conductor, David Law, has been a champion of new repertoire since the inception of the ensemble, which was some 20 years ago. He pursues works from around the world and ensures the finest performances of them at the Australian premiere. He is also an animated advocate for local performers, both young and those of more mature years. As a composer, I am pleased to have my pieces in the hands of such a fine musician. The other ensemble that supports Australian compositions is the Queensland Wind and Brass, a band born out of the Queensland Youth Orchestra's wind ensemble. Again, 25 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. Its founding membership found their time in the Queensland Youth Orchestra Wind Ensemble so satisfying that, and given it was an age-appropriate ensemble, when they became too old to be in the ensemble, they formed the Queensland Wind and Brass. The director of that ensemble, the conductor, is Elisa Jones. She's also an active advocate for Australian repertoire in her position as the conductor there and in her role as a conductor mentor for the State Education Department's instrumental music program in the North Coast region, which has over 200 schools. It's one of 12 education regions in the state. It's got over 200 schools with bands and orchestras. Her promotion of local repertoire is vigorous and animated, wishing to see students in touch with music of their own land. As with David, I'm very pleased to hand over my works to Elisa. As with Elisa, David is a staunch advocate for Australian music to be available to school students in band across the country. Now, I must make a personal disclosure here. Not only am I a Queenslander, composer and conductor, but I'm also the husband of a former music publisher And what's important about that is that you have to understand that being that conductor, being that composer and conductor, there's a bias already, but being the husband of a music publisher, it can sometimes seem to be there's maybe a little compromise. But what's really important is that that was the beginnings of not only the production of new work, the performance of new work, but that production and performance couldn't happen if there wasn't somebody that pressed the printing press. I will allude to some of my works later, but my desire is to show what has been produced at various levels by various composers, various levels, not just at the university and community, high level community band, but right from the babies all the way up. Queensland not only has an enormous growth in bands in schools and the community, but it also has major festivals that have demanded new music lists each year. Of course, the weight of publication of such material that issues from the US is a torrent which cannot be matched. But Queensland events have, for the most part, demanded that each ensemble play some Australian content. And in fact, a number of other national events require the same inclusions in their concert programs. Thus, the incubator for new band music was to be found in Queensland, with major programs in schools and the community, major festivals and events demanding Australian content, and a publishing company established in the late 1980s to take advantage of the growing demand for new repertoire. What was produced? Every style imaginable, except for pop and rock and show tunes. Every piece produced by Brolga Music, the company noted that my wife began, was an original copyright. Its output included folk song settings, rhapsodic works at all levels, overture style pieces, tone poems, marches, but they were all original works. Many younger pieces were written with styles that engaged player and audience, but each work was edited to ensure that entertainment outcomes did not overshadow musical and pedagogical demands. The last work on the concert presented by the Portuguese National Police Symphonic Band is one of the works produced in this period. Bush Dance is a rhapsodic set of fiddle dances, set in a symphonic style. A bush dance is a barn dance, a rustic peasant-style gathering, and the music features imported fiddle tunes from the British Isles. Another of the Brolga music composers is Brian Hogg. Oh, of course, you realise that Bush Dance was written by this old man. Brian Hogg is a composer of eminent standing within the Salvation Army, and his works for concert band, both large-scale and more modest, are testament to his standing within both the Salvation Army and the broader concert band community. He is a melodist, one comfortable with simplicity and complexity. Granger was discussed earlier in the paper, and most Americans would agree that outside of Sousa, Granger is probably the most performed band music composer in the USA. Brian Hogg has become the next most prolific Australian composer of band music in the USA since Granger. His rhapsodic setting of the old British folk song The Ash Grove, titled When On, is the largest selling Australian band piece since Percy Granger. Isn't that amazing? The largest selling band piece since Percy Granger. Hogg has also produced some excellent works at younger levels. His The Visionaries is an outstanding overture style work at level 2.5. Gently is exquisite. Who could imagine an exquisite level 2 piece? But it is. Then imagine a piece a grade level higher that is maybe 3 grade levels more demanding musically, and you have In Stillness. In Stillness is 36 measures of adagio beauty, gorgeously orchestrated and evocative. If you've got good horns, they will love it. As mentioned, Brian's works for young musicians are enticing and interesting. As also mentioned, The Brolga catalogue does not include pop and rock, but one of Hogg's pieces teaches just that. 8th Avenue has standard instrumentation. It sounds like there's a bass player and drummer. The 4 percussion parts are divided up so that you get the whole effect of a drum kit, but it's an individual player playing each part. You must also consider his work fanfare and processional. It's exceptional young band music, suitable for multiple occasions, but most suitable for making music. Be sure to investigate Brian Hogg on the Brolga Music website. Another composer who's those outside of our country might not have heard of is David Jones. I bet you haven't heard of Brian Hogg, some of you. And you won't have heard of David Jones either, I would expect. David is the director of music at an Anglican college here in Brisbane, and he has produced some intriguing works for band. He's influenced by his teaching, writing for younger players cleverly, and also by his fine adult band, producing works to entice both ends of the spectrum of performance skills. Tempest Rising is rhythmic, lyrical, and tonally intriguing. Driven is just that. It's driven. I really love his work, Gypsies. It has lines for soloists that will challenge them, 20 sections that will challenge the whole section, and vivid harmonic and rhythmic constructs that call to mind the gypsy ensembles of Eastern Europe. Then, at level 2, he's got Toys Awakening, and it's just like all the toys in your kid's room have come to life. All of them, all at once. And again, David can be found in the Brolga Music Composers section on their website. Another Brian is the archetypal young band melodist and trickster Brian West. His works may never win a composition contest, but they have won more young band members' hearts in Australia than one could imagine. City Life, Silent Movie, Circus Maximus, No Bears Allowed, Bunyip Blues, Sandy Bay March. These are young band folklore in Australia. My wife and I had walked down the street of a country town recently and heard a young clarinet player busking and playing Bunyip Blues energetically, even if not quite accurately. What was even more exciting is it was the second clarinet part of Bunyip Blues. So it is folklore. But Brian's written Quiet Moments and the majestic Cosgrove. And when you listen to those, you really realise that Brian is truly a composer and not just a trickster. More of Brian's works can be found also in the Brolga Music site. Other composers are to be found and investigated in the Brolga catalogue. Look for Tim Fisher. He's got some really interesting and different quirky things. Jodie Blackshaw, Claire Petherick, Tanya Owens, and many, many more. Go and look at brolgamusic.com. Other Australian voices will be evident in the broader investigations you make. The Birch Pieces book I alluded to above will point you in the direction to find others, and there are other Australian publishers too. Go and find them. Now I guess I should tell you of some of my works, for it would be a form of false modesty to not share those works I think you may enjoy and value, and some I have great affection for. My compositional career has been one that has been in pursuit of writing a lovely melody, from music for the young to those more experienced. Maybe you could listen to Simple Song, That I May Love, Jessie's Well, Beside Still Waters, Tears No Bitterness, and see if I've reached my goal, if I've actually been able to start to write a good melody. They can all be found in the Brolga catalogue. You might also consider works like Masada, Arachnophobia, Pacific Preamble, and my Concertino for Wind Orchestra. if your band has the skill level and the musicality. Then, if you want to hear a young composer's voice, listen to Gon Troppo. I think it's a 0.5 or a 1 level. The melodies were written by our younger son James when he was 11 and set for concert band by his father, but carefully overseen by the melodist, using terminology best suited to a fledgling violinist and music aficionado rather than a fully fledged composer. Dad, the melody should go down there. Dad, that bass line isn't good enough. It's got to do this. Dad, why did you write that? It was an intriguing few hours. Other works from my pen may interest you as well, from the Neil A. Chose Publishing Company. Look up chose.com and search Hultgren and you'll find them. Works such as Motor Perpetuo, Celebration of Life, Melancolgan, Were, and young band works such as Immortal Invisible, Pioneers, Grand March, The Australian Land, and the lyrical and somewhat poignant And Enoch Walked with God, which has just been performed by the Central Band of the Singapore Armed Forces. The Motor Perpetuo I mentioned above is the first movement of my Symphony for Wind Orchestra, which was the artistic outcome of my master's research. Also, part of a research paradigm, but not bound to it, is My Sister's Tears, published by Studio Music in the United Kingdom. The work was the centerpiece of my doctoral research, and it tells one side of the story of my sister's suicide. The research text providing the other perspective. The text is quite sad. The music is in D major. Studio also published Bright Sunlit Morning, my response to September 11 attacks in the USA. Search studiomusic.co.uk. What is important to tell also is that compositions are not dreamt up alone. Well, not always. That last work I mentioned, Bright Sunlit Morning, was commissioned by Dr. Matthew George, one of the conductors for this concert presentation, and also a driving force behind MIM, the Conductors Consortium that is here with the Portuguese National Police Symphonic Band this weekend. A number of the works mentioned that have come from my pen have had their genesis via commission from Dr. George and the University of St. Thomas, St. Paul, Minnesota. Were, Masada, Concertino for Wind Orchestra, Of Questions and Answers, and Arachnophobia was my gift to him for his 30th, my word, that was a long time ago, Matt, wasn't it? For his 50th birthday. When you have a moment, walk up behind him and mention spiders. Dr. George has a vibrant commissioning program of new music for concert band and other ensembles also. That new music would never have come to life without his commitment, vigour and animation. Not only has Dr. George spearheaded the production of new band music through his St. Thomas commissioning program, but he has also engaged in a substantial recording program to both promote the commissioning program and, most importantly, produce recordings that serve as exemplars of the works and exemplars at the highest performance standard. Again, I have been privileged to have many of his commissions from me become excellent performances on disc. So we come to the conclusion of this short story, this short history, this short narrative of Australian concert band music, displaying how, as argued to begin, it is an outcome produced by the alliances of the broad community of interest that has commissioned, performed, championed, and disseminated such works. The final example I gave just a moment ago, the George Hultgren duo, cast the narrative in deep relief, for it talks of new Australian band music commissioned by an American and published around the world. Surely a collaboration outside of any plan that could have been devised. To conclude, As deeply Indigenous and immigrant as our country is, so the music that it produces is formed in the same manner. From the young child endeavouring to hold an instrument correctly, to the professional instrumentalist, realising the composer's intention with all their available skill and musicianship. Australian band music is music made in Australia, but belonging to the world. How good is that? Thank you for your interest. I'd be pleased to hear from any of you. You'll have my email address somewhere, and if I can be of any use to any of you, that would be lovely. Thank you now.